If this is your first Sunday with us, we've been working our way through some of the chapters in the Old Testament books of 1st and 2nd Kings about the prophets, probably the most famous prophets in the Old Testament, Prophet Elijah and the Prophet Elisha. Today's reading is actually quite an exciting story. It's full of ups and downs, it's full of twists and turns and happy bits and sad bits. But just to give you a bit of background, the days of Elijah have passed. During the days of Elijah, the threat to Israel was from inside. It was the threat of Baal worship, which had sort of seeped into everything that the people did. And that was sort of dealt with in a decisive incident that happened on Mount Carmel. But now Elijah has gone, and King Ahab is dead, and his son, King Joram, is ruling in Israel in his place. And the threat is much more an external one. It's the surrounding nations, in particular the nation of Aram, which is ruled by King Ben-Hadad II, and he has his capital in Damascus. So they're the growing power now, and they're the threat to Israel. But there's also another particular thread that's running through the whole chapter, and you can see it. You can see it happening in all the different things that happen. And it's this contrast between the world's way of doing things and God's way of doing things. So Hannah Hay is going to read it for us. Where's Hannah? Today's reading is the whole of 2 Kings chapter 5. And just sit back and just imagine.
Now Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. Now bands from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. "By all means go," the king of Aram replied. "I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. The letter that he took to the king of Israel read, "With this letter I am sending my servant Naaman to you so that you may cure him of his leprosy." As soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes and said, "Am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? See how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me." When Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent this message, "Why have you torn your robes? Make the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to him to say, "Go, wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed." But Naaman went away angry and said, "I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the spot and cure me of my leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than any of the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed?" So he turned and went off in a rage. Naaman's servants went to him and said, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then, when he tells you, 'Wash and be cleansed'?" So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him, and his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. Then Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and said, "Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. Please accept now a gift from your servant." The prophet answered, "As surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing." And even though Naaman urged him, he refused. "If you will not," said Naaman, "please let me, your servant, be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry. For your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other god but the Lord. But may the Lord forgive your servant for this one thing. When my master enters the temple of Rimmon to bow down, and he is leaning on my arm, and I bow also there, when I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord forgive your servant for this." "Go in peace," Elisha said. After Naaman had travelled some distance, Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said to himself, "My master was too easy on Naaman, this Aramean, by not accepting from him what he brought. As surely as the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something from him." So Gehazi hurried after Naaman. When Naaman saw him running towards him, he got down from the chariot to meet him. "Is everything all right?" he asked. "Everything is all right," Gehazi answered. "My master sent me to say, 2 young men from the company of the prophets have just come to me from the hill country of Ephraim. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 sets of clothing." "By all means, take 2 talents," said Naaman. He urged Gehazi to accept them, and then tied up the 2 talents of silver in 2 bags, and with 2 sets of clothing. He gave them to 2 of his servants, and they carried them ahead of Gehazi. When Gehazi came to the hill, he took the things from the servants and put them away in the house. He sent the men away, and they left. Then he went in and stood before his master Elisha. "Where have you been, Gehazi?" Elisha asked. "Your servant didn't go anywhere," Gehazi answered. But Elisha said to him, "Was not my spirit with you when the man got down from his chariot to meet you? Is this the time to take money or to accept clothes, olive groves, vineyards, flocks, herds, or manservants and maidservants? Naaman's leprosy will cling to you and to your descendants forever." Then Gehazi went from Elisha's presence, and he was leprous, as white as snow. Thanks be to God.
Thank you, Hannah. It is quite a story, isn't it? It's quite a story. What strikes me first of all is that the main character in the story isn't Elisha. Rather, it's a foreigner, someone called Naaman. He's not from Israel at all. But I think the whole chapter is about how God cares for people everywhere. He doesn't just care about Israel. He cares about the nation of Aram. He cares about the people in Aram. And he cares about them however good or evil they are, or however much good or harm they've done. He still cares about them. It's also about how he's very good at bringing good out of evil, taking a terrible situation and turning it to the good. And he's also very good at the big picture stuff and the little picture stuff. You know, the relations between Aram and Israel, but also this problem that's going on in this household in Aram. So Naaman, we see straight away that the public image of Naaman is really, he's doing very well. He's a very successful general. He's very good at fighting battles. The battle mentioned there isn't the battle with Israel, it's the battle with Assyria to the north. There's a famous battle, and he's instrumental in winning it for Aram. And so he's very, very highly regarded and very, very much rewarded. And he's got wealth, he's got fame, he's got status. He's got all of these things. He'd probably have a very long Twitter following, a very large Twitter following if he was living today. He'd be invited on celebrity quiz shows. It's that sort of thing. And his public face is he's doing really well. And yet, underneath it all, we see that he's got this big problem which he cannot solve. He cannot do anything about. I'm sure he's tried. I'm sure he's spent a lot. But none of it has solved his problem, which is leprosy. And in the Old Testament, the word leprosy is used to refer to any incurable skin disease. So he has an incurable skin disease. And that problem would affect him. Not only would it cause him great discomfort, it would affect his relationships with other people in the family, it would affect his status in the community. Lepers tended to be shunned. I've got a feeling maybe it was quite a closely kept secret, but it was still there. And he couldn't deal with it. He couldn't solve it. All his success, all the things that he had, they couldn't help him. And I was thinking, well, so there's this poor guy, poor man, living all these thousands of years ago in far away, what today would be Syria. And yet, I think there are people today who can identify with him. You know, people who on the surface appear to be doing really well. Good job, nice house, big car, lots of friends, all that sort of stuff. But underneath it all, they're longing for healing. And it might be a physical thing that is beyond them, or it might be a mental thing that they struggle with, or it might be a spiritual thing. You know, they're longing for that sense of wholeness, or shalom, which we've talked about so often. And so this story, it's got an ageless relevance. It's not age-specific. It could be relevant today. So there's Naaman. The world has failed Naaman when he needed its help. Now God steps in. And we notice that God's ways are very, very different from the ways of the world. He doesn't send a great healer with a fantastic reputation and a beautiful wing of a hospital named after him. You know, he doesn't send someone who's going to do a great performance and is internationally renowned. He sends a slave girl. Well, actually, he doesn't send her because she's already there. And the reason she's there is because Naaman's soldiers, on one of their raids into Israel, probably illegal raids we'd call them these days, have snapped her up along with other people and forced them into a life of slavery. People did that. Still happens today, actually. And that's the person God uses to help Naaman. And as I was saying to the young folks, she's a remarkable person. She's just young. She's lost absolutely everything. All her hopes and dreams shattered. All her prospects gone. She is now a slave. She's a possession of someone else. She's having to work in his household. She has no idea what's going to happen to her in the future. But despite all of these things, the remarkable thing about her is she still has compassion. She still cares. And she's able to say to Naaman's wife, listen, I know someone who can help with this. I know someone who can help. And Naaman by now, he's tried everything else, so he'll try anything. So he goes to King Ben-Hadad, and King Ben-Hadad, he's up for it too. He loves Naaman. He really values him. He's a key person in his government. You know, he's a great general. Anything to help Naaman. But notice that the king tries to help in a very worldly way. He piles up the money and the expensive gifts and the troop of soldiers on horseback and this sort of sinister letter, which is mildly pleading but also mildly threatening. And he bundles this all up and then trusts Naaman into it, and off they go into Israel. Not to the home of the prophet that the wee girl had talked about at all, but to the palace of King Joram. And you notice King Joram's quite worldly as well, because his immediate response when he reads this letter is to think it's a trick. It's a bit like he's trying to provoke some sort of quarrel that will lead to an official declaration of war here. This is not good. The last thing Joram thinks about is actually that God might be involved in this. He never even thinks of Elisha. Instead, he gets really, really upset. And the way of showing you're really upset in these days is to tear your clothes. And then he gets this, so Elisha steps in with this message. And it's a bit of sort of, it's a bit of an admonishment, a bit like a parent talking to a child. Oh, stop tearing your clothes. Just send him to me. And you know, I'm trying to picture what's happening. I don't know how many of you can remember those lovely black and white films, history films set in medieval times. Well, not history films, but they're all daring-do films where you've got knights on horseback and the hero at the head, and they go rushing here and they go rushing there. So I can imagine this troop of soldiers coming rushing in to this palace where Joram is, and the hero jumps off, and the soldiers wait there patiently with their horses chomping at the bit, and he rushes in, and there's a pause. And then he rushes back out again, he's back on his horseback, woof, they're all off again, thundering all the way out into the middle of nowhere, and they come thundering up to Elisha's house, and they surround it, and they're all on their horseback, and their glory and their finery, and someone, go and knock on the door. so this, whoever it is, goes and knocks on the door, bang, 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 nothing. Knock again, bang, bang, bang. Eventually, this sort of door creaks open, and this servant comes out. And it's not what Naaman had expected at all. He'd expected a big welcome, he expected the red carpet down, feasting, hospitality, you name it, and then a great palaver, you know, hocus pocus, lots of gestures, big sacrifices, all that sort of stuff. But that's not what he gets at all. He gets this door creaking open, and this servant says, I mean, it's not even Elisha. The servant, my master says you're to go and wash in the River Jordan 7 times. Thank you. Bang. What? And there's all soldiers are looking at, what? What's he going to do about this? This famous general. And of course, Naaman is just the last straw. I've come all this way. I've come to this back of beyond country, into this middle of nowhere, and I get told to go and wash in the Jordan. And I mean, look at how he describes it. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than any of the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed? It would certainly have saved him a journey. But you see, this is God at work. And this is God at work in Naaman. Naaman is on a journey. He is learning God's ways. So first of all, there he is, a great general with everything he could possibly want. He gets leprosy. And then he tries everything, cures everything. How does God work? He sends a slave girl. And then he goes with all his wealth and his riches, and he gets this message at the door. Thank you very much. Bang. And now it's his servants. They're saying, hang on. Oh, great, mighty warrior, sir. Hang on. Listen, if he'd asked you to do something difficult, you'd have done it. If he'd asked you to go on a quest, you'd have gone on the quest. What's a bit of water? How's that going to harm you? Might as well give it a try. This is God at work in Naaman. And Naaman listens, and he said, okay, I'll give it a try. And so it means swallowing his pride. It means going down to the banks of this muddy river, peeling off all his fine clothes, and then wading out into the water. And I can imagine all his soldiers, all his lieutenants, all his servants, they're watching. And he's there, he's vulnerable. Okay, what did he say I had to do? Dip down 7 times. So he starts ducking down under the water. And I can imagine by the time he gets to the 4th or the 5th time, he's beginning to think, was that prophet taking the mickey here? Was he trying to make a fool of me? I mean, there's nothing happening. I mean, and there's everybody looking at him. Are the soldiers beginning to snigger? He says, oh, well, in for a penny, in for a pound. You know, you can't get much lower than this. I might as well go for it. 6 times, 7 times. It's gone. See, that's how God works. When he comes up the 7th time, his leprosy is gone. But his whole life has changed. Now he is whole again. He's not just physically whole or mentally holy. He is now spiritually holy. You can see that by how he responds. He goes back to Elisha. Now I know there is no God in all the world except in Israel. Your servant will never again make any burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other god but to the Lord. And he even asks for some soil from Israel to be taken back to Aram so that he can stand on that soil to worship God. I mean, that's how seriously he's taking all of this. And the only thing he asks forgiveness for, he says, I'm not going to ever worship any other god, but there's this situation. And I think this is what makes this story even more real. There's this situation, he's thinking ahead, hang on, there's a time when the king holds on to me and he's going to bow down and I'm going to have to bow down as well. So he explains it all and he's really apologetic. And Elisha says, go in peace. So that day, he finds salvation. And you can imagine just for a moment the impact this is going to have. I said earlier on, this is about God doing the big picture stuff and the little picture stuff. So the little picture stuff is how he heals and transforms and makes Naaman whole again. But imagine the impact that's going to have in relations between Aram and Israel. I mean, this is an amazing thing. This means King Ben-Hadad II is going to say, oh, he cured you of leprosy. Wow. I mean, it's going to change things. It's going to change Joram, the king of Israel. He did what? Oh, good. You can just imagine all these things going on. It's an epic event, but it's a big picture event and it's a little picture event. And I said at the beginning that the thread that runs through the whole of this chapter is the contrast between God's ways and the world's ways. The world thinks that true happiness can be found through success and wealth and riches and all these things, possessions, you name it. But God says happiness is the gift of my loving, forgiving, healing presence in your life. That is happiness. That is shalom. The world says we can reach God through our own efforts by being good and being religious and obeying rules and giving big donations. Oh yes, brownie points. God says we can reach God by humbling ourselves and trusting him. We used to have an annual conference in southeast Edinburgh up at the Faith Mission Auditorium. We had it every year in October, November. We're not going to have one this year because it's a bit too late. But with all this presbytery planning stuff, there is talk that we'll go back to maybe having that annual conference again. But what the conference this particular passage reminds me of is a conference when the sort of keynote speaker was Professor David Smith. Quite a few of you may remember that conference. Because he was talking about this whole issue of world religions and Christianity. How sure, because, pluralism will tell us that we're all one, we're all the same, we're all going the same way. And that's another sermon topic, so we won't go into that today. But basically, he came up with two diagrams which actually very clearly show the difference between following Jesus and, I can say with confidence, every single other world religion I have ever come across in my life. And so here's the first of the diagrams. Religion will tell you that the only way to encounter God and encounter his love and encounter his healing is by climbing a ladder. It's a sort of ladder of brownie points. It's a ladder of rituals and ceremonies and gifts and things you do. And so there's all the different religions of the world. They've got their own ladder, but we're all trying to do it. We're trying to climb that ladder and we're hoping we're not going to slip and slide back down. Snakes and ladders, So that is what religion offers us. And that is completely different from what Jesus is offering us. This is what Jesus is offering us. It's not about us climbing up. It's about us humbling ourselves, swallowing our pride, and going down to the foot of the cross. It's about us acknowledging that there's nothing we could ever possibly do that would earn God's love, or his healing, or his forgiveness. but that in his love and grace and mercy, he's already offering it freely to us. All we've got to do is humble ourselves and accept it. That's all we have to do. It's about humbling ourselves and putting our trust in him. And Naaman catches a glimpse of that day when he humbles himself and climbs down to the muddy banks of that river Jordan. He catches a glimpse of it. And it's something we all experience when we swallow our pride and put our trust in him. Of course, the chapter doesn't end with the healing of Naaman, does it? It ends in tragedy for Elisha's servant, Gehazi. And what a silly man. What a silly man. He had been Elisha's servant for quite some time now. He had experienced firsthand God's ways. He had experienced firsthand the glory of God revealed in this other way of doing things. He had got glimpses of glory. But in his heart of hearts, he still hadn't let go of his love of worldly things. And so he schemes and he deceives and he lies and he messes up big time. His actions diminish God's grace. His actions diminish even the reputation of Elisha and his prophets. I mean, what prophet would need a shekel of silver and a new suit of clothes? It just goes against everything that Elisha and the prophets believe in. His actions tarnish the great gift of healing that God has given to Naaman freely. It's all sort of spoiled a bit because of what Gehazi does. And my way of thinking about it is this. Gehazi chooses the way of the world, and he ends up with the world. It's like Naaman's been on this journey. He starts off a leper. He encounters God's healing power. He discovers wholeness. Gehazi starts off with the wholeness bit. He's already living that life. He's already experiencing it, but it's not good enough for him. And he ends up a leper. All that glitters is not gold. So, questions to ponder. Question one, how do we see ourselves? Think of that wee girl who made all the difference. How do we see ourselves? Are we a big person? Successful? Yes. Here I am, God, you'll be pleased, Or are we like that wee girl, a little person, just humble and willing to be used by God to do something special? That's the first question. Second question, is our trust in God total? This is the Gehazi question. Is it total? Or are we still holding back? And then the third question, which is probably the biggest of the lot. Have we ever been down to the foot of the cross? Have we ever climbed down those steps? Have we ever gone down to that place where we meet with Jesus and where we begin to experience his grace and his peace? So just a few moments in silence. What's God been saying to you today? Thank you, Father, for that servant girl and for Naaman, who learned humility that day, and for the grace he experienced when he climbed down into the Jordan. And our prayer is that each and every day of our lives we might be willing to climb down to the foot of the cross, to humble ourselves, and to put our trust in Jesus. Because we know That's where we meet with you. That's where we experience that wholeness and that peace. So may it be so, for Jesus' sake.